Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. What if Naruto had Cynthia as his affectionate mother? Naruto x Pokemon movie. It was a beautiful morning in Celestic. Pokemon were happily running around accompanied by their trainers and partners and sometimes the latter's significant other and offspring. In this town we find a small, but well-kept Pokemon Daycare (PDC). The PDC was a small establishment for locals and sometimes travelers to let their Pokemon relax and mingle with other Pokemon in a peaceful environment free of risks. A certain ex-champions and her wife's Pokemon made sure that. One could also call it a Pokemon resort. You could entrust your Pokemon to the PDC for as long as you like, though you must give some sort of identification and insurance that you will come back for your Pokemon instead of abandoning it. It may not be a well-known daycare, though all people who actually used their service were highly satisfied with the results. Results being that their Pokemon were brimming with energy and looking incredibly happy. There were only 2 people working there. It may sound overwhelming at first, but considering who one of the 2 is, it is not surprising that the daycare works as well as it does. Additionally, they have their own Pokemon helping out. Ex-champion Kushina Uzumaki and her wife were the founders and owners of the now 10-year-old resort, and they never regretted even a single second of it. Kushina became champion of Sinnoh at the tender age of 16 and retired from the position only 1 year afterwards due to the position taking up most of her time and allowing less time to be spent with her at that time girlfriend. Even though being champion brought in a lot of money, it was not worth it for her if it meant she couldn't spend time with her girlfriend, thus neglecting the love of her life. Of course her girlfriend protested the action, but nothing would ever come between Kushina and her ironclad rule of, family will always come first no matter what, not even her most important person. So after some discussions and ideas, they both decided to settle down and open the PDC. Her wife being highly talented in the art of healing and tending to Pokemon was just an added bonus. At the counter of the reception desk in the establishment we find said ex-champion eagerly waiting for a certain someone to arrive. Kushina is a gorgeous woman with ankle-length, red hair representing her fiery personality and passion perfectly. It framed both sides of her face and was parted to the left with a black hair clip, a gift from her wife. She had a slender yet feminine build that only enhanced her already divine beauty. Her skin was fair, though it had a light tan from working outside and traveling for most of her youth. Violet eyes panned down and looked over herself, checking the outfit she was wearing. A long, green, loose-fitting dress over a sleeveless, high-collared, white blouse. At the moment she was tending to the counter with a friendly smile on her face, fixing her hair every few minutes in anticipation. After all, her wife is coming back today. 3 days without her feel like so long, lamented Kushina in her mind. At least she will be back soon. Her wife went on a small business trip to Kalos for some eggs she wanted to hatch back in Sinnoh, to add a bit more color and joy into their little paradise they created a couple years back. She also needed to visit certain Pokemon professors to get 2 little munchkins special gifts for their journey. Good thing she didn't have to take the ever so long route via ship and could just fly over to Kalos. I really want to fly on her Altaria again soon. She is so fluffy and cuddly. You could fly all day without stopping once. Kushina mused to herself. Kushina's thoughts were cut off when the door swung open and consequently ringing the bell hanging above it. Perking up at the sound and looking towards the entrance, her face broke into the happiest smile you will ever see and her cheeks took on a slightly rosy hue. There in the doorway of their Pokemon Daycare stood her beautiful wife, Cheryl Uzumaki. Cheryl, like Kushina, looked so beautiful it was simply otherworldly. Her normally calf-length, emerald green hair was weaved into a single thick braid going over her right shoulder to the front and stopping just short of her thighs. It parted in front of her face to both sides in the shape of 2 leaves with a single fringe hanging over her cute button nose. Cheryl possessed a similar build as Kushina's own, her dress and small cardigan giving her a timid but incredibly loving aura. Unlike Kushina, however, who was widely known for her burning passion that could ignite everyone's inner fire and her outspokenness, Cheryl was timid and soft-spoken, though no less determined than her wife. Cheryl supported Kushina for most of her journey and was with her through thick and thin, with her, always there to catch her if she ever fell. The dress went down to her shins and was the same color as her hair except for the part that covered her torso, which was dark brown with vertical lines. It didn't cover her arms or shoulders though. That was what the grass green cardigan was for, which she always wore over the dress. After taking off her brown leather boots, she turned to the counter and saw a practically glowing Kushina looking at her with a radiant smile. Cheryl smiled back and exclaimed with as much love as she could muster, "I'm back, love." Not a second after those words left her lips, she saw Kushina running towards her. They embraced and gave each other a long loving kiss, showing just how much they care about each other. "I missed you, Cheryl," whispered Kushina, with her forehead leaning against Cheryl's and lips just inches away from her own. After giving Kushina another quick peck on the lips, Cheryl breathed back, "I missed you too. I couldn't stop thinking about the two of you even for a single second." Kushina's smile only brightened after hearing her wife's words. He was asking the whole time when his mama would be back home again, she told her, amused. They suddenly heard footsteps from above and saw a small yellow blur rushing down the stairs. A grinning Kushina turned towards the blur with a small grin and softly muttered, "Speak of the devil and he shall appear." Cheryl was already on one knee with open arms waiting for the inevitable. The blur jumped into her arms and revealed itself to be a small boy in a plain white t-shirt and black shorts, looking to be around 7 or 8 years old. The boy had spiky, blonde, chin-length hair poking in all possible directions and the same emerald eyes as Cheryl. After being caught in her arms, the boy hugged her around neck and nuzzled his cheek against hers. "You're back, Mama," the now revealed son of Kushina and Cheryl exclaimed, full of happiness. Gladly returning the hug, Cheryl smiled at his affectionate gesture and ran her fingers through his golden hair. "Hello, Naruto. How was my little sunshine while I was away?" She accentuated her statement with a small kiss on his cheek and a heartfelt smile. "I bet you had lots of fun with Mommy." He gave her a big kiss onto her right cheek. "It was lots of fun and I learned tons of new things." Slowly standing up again with Naruto still in her arms, she walked over to Kushina and nudged her towards their living room, which was one of the rooms in the hallway that was directly behind the counter. Not many people came to the PDC at this time of the day, so it was fine to leave the counter unattended for a while, and even if someone needed anything they can just ring the bell at the reception. After the family settled down on the couch with Kushina and Cheryl being on the left and right side of Naruto respectively, Naruto told Cheryl about how Kushina recounted some of their own adventures and gave him advice for his own journey in a couple years. Her advice ranging from the most basic survival tips all the way to how to properly treat and train not only your Pokemon but also yourself. He also explained how fun it was playing with all the Pokemon on the different artificial simulated biomes and resorts their PDC has to offer. A small lake for water types and Pokemon who like to swim in general, little patches of trees and even small forests providing protection from the sun and accommodating various bug and grass type Pokemon, huge fields for the more battle-lusty Pokemon to spar without interruption or if they just want to run around feeling the wind across their fur scales. Naruto always got along well with any type of Pokemon. It originally started off with only his mother's Pokemon and from there stemmed off into all kinds of Pokemon. Be they trained or wild, all of them simply loved the little bundle of energy. Even the most vicious-looking Pokemon turned soft at the sight of him. It was not only him though. His best friend had the same effect on Pokemon. He gotten to know her when he was only 1 or 2 years old and they had been inseparable ever since. They met one other when Kushina took him with her to Professor Carolina in Celestic Town, where she learned more about Pokemon care, new discoveries from other regions, and sometimes borrows books on legendary Pokemon to read to Naruto. She still visits the professor from time to time. Such a trip took no time at all, especially if you have a champion-level Salamence in your possession. Even if Cheryl was the one who wanted to visit the Celestic Town Historical Research Center, it takes no less time on her Altaria. There Naruto met Professor Carolina's granddaughter, who was around the same age as him. Without anyone even saying anything, they began playing together like they were already best of friends. From that day on they would try to convince their mothers and grandmother respectively to go meet the other as often as possible, even going so far as to using their secret weapon over and over again, big watery eyes and a quivering lip. That always seemed to work. And then Mommy's Tyranitar put me on his head and we walked all over the place. That was so cool. I love it when he does that, Naruto told Cheryl, concluding his recap of exciting and interesting stuff he did with Kushina in her absence. Cheryl just smiled at him with closed eyes and ruffled his hair while saying, "That sure sounds like you had a lot of fun. If you want we can fly with Altaria sometime again. I bet she would like to see you too. Naruto beamed at that possibility. Of course, I would love to fly with you and Altaria again. She is just so nice, soft, and fluffy, and you're awesome too, mama. He replied overly excited. So you don't want to fly with your mommy and her cool salamence anymore? Kushina exclaimed, holding the back of her hand against her forehead in mock hurt. Seeing this, Cheryl giggled softly into her hand and watched Naruto's panic-stricken face with amusement. His eyes widened comically and started flailing around with his arms chanting apologies. No, I love you mommy and I find your salamence super cool too. It was just quite a while ago since I last flew together with mama. Please don't be sad mommy, explained a teary-eyed Naruto frantically while hugging Kushina fiercely. Kushina couldn't hold it in any longer, it was just too cute, and hugged back just as fiercely. I could never be sad with you around my little baby boy. I was just messing with you a little, she proclaimed while burying her face into his hair and started tickling him. Of course he burst out laughing under the relentless tickle attack by Kushina. Wiggling out of her grasp a little, he started tickling her back and soon they were both rolling around the couch laughing. Somewhere in between they got Cheryl involved too, who was now under combined assault of Naruto and Kushina. After 10 minutes the laughing settled down to peaceful silence, only to be interrupted by Kushina asking, so do you want to come with me and Naruto to Celestic Town, or would you rather stay here and rest after your trip, Cheryl? She smiled apologetically, I'm quite exhausted after so much traveling. I shall join you too the next time you visit her and would like to rest for today. He immediately perked up at his name and the mentioning of Celestic Town in one sentence, though deflated a bit after hearing that Cheryl won't be coming. However, knowing that his mother will join them next time lifted his spirits again. Stars appeared in his eyes and he started bouncing around on the couch with energy only an 8-year-old who is about to meet his best friend can have. We are visiting Canyon Cyn and Grandma. Awesome, he shouted while doing cartwheels. Yes, I wanted to ask her about some important things. You and little Cynthia can continue reading the books about the Weather Trio of Hoenn and Creation Trio of Sinnoh you started last time. I can't wait to continue reading it with Canyon Cyn. There is so much stuff to read about them and even more stuff to discover on our own. Not to mention all the awesome adventures we will have after we start our journey. Cheryl and Kushina were glad he was able to find someone he can trust unconditionally so early on in his life. Adding the fact that they liked the same things only made it better. The mothers hoped those feelings won't change anytime soon. A certain grandmother was of the same mind. Now, before even thinking about your journey, there's still much for you two to learn. However, she was interrupted by Naruto before she could finish her lecture. Being prepared for all kinds of situations is super important. I know mama, after all I learned from the best. He proclaimed with puffed out chest and a lot of pride. That's right, young man, and we will teach and train both of you to be more than ready, and that includes making dinner. So how about you go with us into the kitchen and prepare lunch together with your awesome mothers? What do you say? Kushina asked her little family. Unanimously agreeing, they then made their way towards the door with Naruto still between them, holding both their hands, leading them to the kitchen. He started helping in the kitchen when he was 5 and had continued to do so ever since. Sometimes even making small things like cookies by himself to surprise them, and ice cream for Cynthia because she loves ice cream. Loves ice cream. It is borderline worship, but that just makes her even cuter. That is also why he likes to make ice cream for her. Her eyes always start to sparkle and a cute little smile spreads on her face at the sight of ice cream. The flavor doesn't even matter as long as it is cold, sweet ice cream goodness. Back in the kitchen, they just finished making some rice with a couple side dishes and were now preparing the table for lunch. As soon as lunch was finished, the mother-son duo went to prepare themselves for their little trip. It was now early afternoon and they were about to take off on salamence towards Celestic Town, who was enjoying head pats from Naruto, growling in content. Kissing Naruto on his forehead and Kushina on the lips, Cheryl waved them goodbye. Have a safe trip you two and have fun. Waving back, they both shot her a big grin. Thanks. See you later, they shouted in unison. Okay salamence, let's head to Celestic Town. After hearing his master's command, salamence roared once and shot off into the air at unbelievable speeds. Soon enough the only thing you could see of them was a speck in the horizon. Cheryl's gaze lingered a little longer after they took off before turning around and closing the PDC to get some rest. She reminded herself to wrap up and hide the presents she got in Kalos for the two children. First up though was saying hello to the Pokemon she left behind and getting some sleep in her and Kashina's bed. The day started like any other for a certain blonde girl. Waking up, doing all kind of things in the bathroom, cook breakfast and getting ready for the day. She and her grandmother were living together at the research center owned by said grandmother. Like the name implies, they research the historical and legendary Pokemon of Sinnoh and events that may be connected to them. The center encompasses multiple buildings including their home, it being a little, wooden two-story house. We now find her in her room sitting in front of a mirror, brushing her mid-thigh length blonde hair. This girl was Cynthia Carolina, granddaughter of Professor Carolina and Naruto's best friend. Cynthia is a petite girl with long, flowing blonde hair which framed both sides of her face with a single bang going over the left half of her face, blocking the eye from view. She was wearing a white sundress together with her ever-present black and yellow hair clips, each looking like a pair of Umbreon ears. They were her absolute favorites. She received them on her 4th birthday as a handmade present from Naruto. Narrow, gray eyes were practically glowing with happiness. After all, her grandma told her yesterday that he and his mother Kashina would come over to play today. It's been already a couple of days since I last saw Ruto. She thought to herself, today we can finally continue reading that book about those legendary Pokemon. The thought alone brought a happy smile to her face. Finishing up with her hair, she stood up and took one last look at herself in the mirror before going downstairs to have breakfast with her grandma. "Morning, Grandma. I hope you like what I made," she exclaimed joyfully and sat down at the table her grandmother was already occupying. Professor Carolina was an elderly woman with neck-length gray blonde hair cut in a bob-like fashion. She had the same gray eyes as Cynthia, just not as narrow. True to her title, she was wearing a long white lab coat over a pink shirt and brown capri pants. Her grandmother could only smile at her good mood. "I always love the food you make for breakfast. You will be an excellent cook someday if you continue improving like this. I also noticed you were a lot happier today than you were the past few days. Is there any particular reason for it?" she teasingly added with a sly smile. Even though she already knew the answer, it was always cute seeing her granddaughter's expressions. "You know why I'm so happy," she said, pouting. "My best friend is coming over again today. He couldn't come over for so long." She emphasized it by making a big archway gesture with her little arms. "4 days isn't that long, sweetie," an amused professor replied. That statement brought back the pout full force. These 4 days felt like ages. Stressing the last word and puffing up her cheeks, though her mood suddenly made a complete turnaround when she thought about one particular thing she missed nearly as much as her best friend himself. His ice cream. "When he gets here we will make that wondertastic ice cream as soon as possible," she thought to herself with stars appearing in her eyes and drool starting to escape her slightly agape mouth. "Are you thinking about ice cream again?" her grandmother asked, amused. "Honestly, you can cook so well yet nearly destroy the kitchen when trying to make some by yourself. I don't even know how you nearly started a fire while making ice cream." By now the professor was laughing jovially and Cynthia just turned beet red from embarrassment. It wasn't her fault the sugar started smoking out of nowhere, right? "Stupid granny. I bet it was the stove's fault. 5 times in a row," she grumbled to herself. A tiny rain cloud followed her depressing thoughts and started pouring over her despondent figure. The other person occupying the room only laughed louder at her cute granddaughter. The granddaughter who was able to befriend the most violent Pokemon and conjure marvelous meals yet fails at the mundane task of making ice cream. Before the situation could get any more out of control, Cynthia's control that is, they both heard a distant roar from outside. Cynthia immediately perked up at this, her short bout of depression all but forgotten. "I could never forget this sound. The sound of an incoming red-haired mother and my best friend. My best friend who can make awesome ice cream," she secretly and silently added to her previous thoughts while nodding to herself. Not that anyone can read her mind to begin with. At least no one that was here at the moment, she hoped. She rushed past her still smiling grandmother like a Garchomp using Dragon Rush. Fortunately her little Dragon Rush was perfectly accurate, unlike the actual attack. Tunnel vision sure must be inconvenient. Putting on a pair of white sandals, she yanked open the door as fast as possible and ran out without even closing the door. Who cares about an open door if your best friend finally comes over to play after yay? It were only 4 days though. Fine 4 days then. Still super long. Pushing the fact that her grandma somehow knew exactly what she was thinking deep into some unused corner of her colorful mind, she came to an abrupt stop and gazed at the direction the roar came from. Squinting her eyes a little, trying to see even a teensy bit more, she finally saw a blue and red dragon approaching at what looked like supersonic speed if the sonic boom was anything to go by. The color scheme alone told you it was a salamence, no doubt. Not many dragon-like Pokemon can fly such high speeds and even less match the coloring. It was by no means an ordinary one though. Its normally separate wings were merged into a single enormous, crescent-shaped wing, looking like it could cut through anything in its way. The once shelled underbelly was transformed into a vest-like armor, encasing its chest and shoulders, though the once just as armored lower jaw was now free and exposing the red flesh they laid underneath, thus streamlining its body even further. Finally, the tail was noticeably shorter and the middle and upper pair of head fins elongated. The middle pair now spanning over towards the bridge of the nose, while the upper pair grew in length and became cuspidal. This was Kashina's Mega Salamence, her first and strongest Pokemon. Considered to be one of the most powerful Salamence to have ever existed, even rivaling some legendaries in terms of raw power alone. At first glance you would only notice the above-average height and slightly more defined muscle structure. After seeing him in active combat even once, however, one would change their opinion as fast as a wild Abra would teleport away, and that is without even needing to Mega Evolve. Kashina only received the Keystone together with the Mega Stone after visiting Kalos together with Cheryl for some vacation, and to this date there were only a couple of trainers who could actually push her enough to even consider using it in battle. Seeing the majestic Pokemon, Cynthia gained a determined glint in her eyes and swore an oath to herself, "One day I will have my own awesome dragon and then I will beat you, Auntie Kashina." Not a minute longer and one could make out the passengers on top flying with Salamence. The one standing out the most being Kashina with her mile-long hair floating gorgeously in the wind. Sitting right in front of her was Naruto holding onto Salamence while looking incredibly entertained. Both looking like they were having the time of their life while flying over the landscape. As soon as she saw Naruto looking into her general direction, she started waving with both of her arms while jumping up and down in excitement. A couple minutes earlier, "That was so awesome, Mommy. I didn't know Salamence can Mega Evolve while flying with us here," Naruto shouted over the rushing winds. Nuzzling his cheek with her own, she replied, "Of course he can do that. We are just awesome like that." He started nuzzling right back with a happy smile plastered on his face. "Yay, all of your Pokemon are awesome. Mama's Pokemon too. Both of you are the awesomenest." "Ah, thank you, and you are the awesomenest for both of us too," she responded and started to hug the life out of him. Naruto suddenly pointed downwards in the direction they were traveling and exclaimed excitedly, "Look! It's Canyon. Let's wave back." She could only grin in amusement at his eagerness to see little Cynthia and complied with his request. Seeing them waving back only made her continue flailing her arms around with even more fervor. She was practically glowing with happiness and excitement at this point. She didn't even notice her grandmother that now stood only a couple steps behind her, playfully shaking her head at her normally composed granddaughter's behavior at the prospect of spending the day together with Naruto and meeting her Auntie Kashina again. Even though she hoped Auntie Cheryl would come too, but she will meet her soon again anyway when going over to play at their house. Growing up without parents wasn't nearly as bad as it could be. Having her grandma, her aunts she wasn't actually related to, and Naruto while growing up more than made up for that. "And one day I will make my own little family." The sound of something landing and the subsequent wind generated by said landing rattled her awake, and she pushed back the picture of her as a young adult leaning on an older-looking Naruto with a blonde girl with emerald eyes on his shoulders for later. Clambering off hastily, Naruto took off as soon as he hit the ground and ran directly towards Cynthia. He was not the only one eagerly running though. Cynthia took no less time to start sprinting in his direction. Ruto, Canyon. After greeting each other by shouting each other's names, they started jumping and spinning around excitedly while holding onto each other's arms. "These 4 days felt so long without you. It was so boring," she lamented overdramatized. He only nodded his head in understanding. They sure felt like ages, right? Even if my mum taught me lots of stuff and there were Pokemon around, playing with you is still the best. He proclaimed happily. Cynthia blushed a little at his heartfelt confession. I know exactly what you mean. Grandma is awesome and messing with the researchers can be fun, but nothing can beat playing together with your best friend. She proclaimed while nodding sagely. Off to the side we find Professor Carolina and Kushina observing the little reunion with loving eyes and small smiles. These two children really were made for each other. When seeing these moments I can't thank modern science and medicine enough. A lone tear of happiness slid down her right cheek. Cheryl and me will be forever grateful for that. Were it not for that, this all would not have been possible, she finished with a voice full of emotions. I can still remember the day you and Cheryl came to me asking whether I knew of a method for you two to have a child the natural way. You were so relieved and joyful when I said yes, the professor replied nostalgically. The method mentioned is a complicated procedure that involves artificial insemination, altering the sperm with medically impossible sounding treatments so the child will inherit features of both mothers instead of only one by working in the DNA of the other woman. This was made possible thanks to highly advanced medical equipment and extensive research pertaining this particular field of science. Even though it is impossible to completely erase all traits belonging to the donor, it was no problem for Kushina and Cheryl. His blonde hair looked beautiful and went well together with Cheryl's emerald green eyes and Kushina's slightly rounded face. It was obvious he inherited his hair from the donor. Neither Kushina nor Cheryl had anything remotely close to blonde hair themselves. Same goes for both of their family members. Kushina's smile only brightened at that particular memory, exclaiming, "Of course we would be happy." It was our chance to complete our small paradise and we grasped that opportunity as soon as it was within our reach. We didn't regret it then and we won't start now. Finishing passionately with a grabbing gesture and a fist pump right after, she settled back to watching the children. She sweat dropped at the scene she was witnessing. A starry-eyed Cynthia with drooling mouth dragging a smiling Naruto towards the house and probably the kitchen if Cynthia's expression is anything to go by. Professor Carolina looked on highly amused by the unique relationship, though suddenly took a thinking pose for a second before asking Kushina a question she forgot to ask for the past 7 years. How did you two decide on who would carry your child? I know in the end it was Cheryl. I'm curious on what made you choose her, no offense. A small smile appeared on Kushina's face after hearing her question. None taken. I already asked myself when someone would ask that, she remarked amused. It wasn't really a hard decision to be honest. If you just take one look at Cheryl, what words would you use to describe her? Thinking for a second, the professor replied, kind, caring, beautiful, reliable and incredibly loving, before realizing what Kushina was aiming for. The perfect mother, they said at the same time. Exactly. I know she would be a mother regardless of who will carry little Naruto. When she asked me why I want her to do it, I told her that she was always there for me throughout our journey together even though we met as total strangers. We went through thick and thin together. I could only recklessly run head first into all those adventures because I knew she would be there to catch me if I fell. Chuckling to herself she continued, quite selfish, right? Some may say I told her to carry the baby because I'm selfish and don't want to go through the hassle and pain of childbirth. Others may claim I don't love her enough to carry our child. Realizing how egoistic I was during our travels, I decided that I wanted to show her that I will be there for her just as much as she was for me. I wanted her to see that I loved her just as much as she does me. The truth is that I would have loved to be the one to be pregnant, but I also wanted to give something back to Cheryl after all the times I took her for granted. It was not out of guilt or any kind of imaginary debt. It was out of unconditional love that I wanted for Cheryl to experience the joy of giving birth to our child. After hearing Kushina's little story, Professor Carolina couldn't help but smile. What a wonderful story. This only reaffirms me in my belief of you two being the paragon of perfection every couple should strive for. Blushing at the compliment, Kushina held her rosy cheeks and swayed a little from side to side with her eyes closed. Oh, stop that. We are just a young couple of women deeply in love with each other. Everyone would do that if they were in our situation, she replied bashfully. Anyway, we should probably check up on the children. I don't want to have Cynthia near a stove with any sugar nearby, the elderly woman suggested with a hearty laugh. That is probably a good idea. I still can't understand how you nearly set a kitchen on fire while making ice cream, Kushina remarked with a bemused smile. The only reply she got was a short, "Children," accompanied by a closed-eyed shrug. Arriving in the kitchen they found two blonde-haired children happily eating ice cream. Naruto was eating what looked like strawberry-flavored ice cream and Cynthia was enjoying her favorite chocolate chip cookie dough ice cream. Noticing they were not alone anymore, they turned towards the doorway and saw two adults smiling at them. "Hey mommy and grandma," exclaimed Naruto while running over to them and giving his self-proclaimed grandma a big hug. In the meantime Cynthia ran over to Kushina and gave her the same treatment. Smiling down at the little up-and-coming pâtissier, she ruffled his hair a little. "How are you, little munchkin? I see you made ice cream again. Did Cynthia say thank you to you for making her favorite, even if it takes longer?" she asked with a friendly smile. "Couldn't be any better. After all, I can finally play together with Canyon again," he proclaimed with a toothy grin and squinted eyes. "Yay, she did say thanks. Even if she didn't say thanks, I would still make ice cream for her. After all, she is my bestest best friend. It didn't take much longer anyway. I prepared most of the stuff at home already." Before she could respond, he ran off to the freezer, took out a little plastic container, ran back and held it towards her. "Here, I made some ice cream for you too. This time it's coffee." Taking the small container from his hands, she thanked him and ruffled his hair one last time before excusing herself because she still had work to do for the day. Saying their goodbyes, they started going to Cynthia's room together with Kushina. "So who wants to read books about Hoenns and Sinnoh's legendary trios?" The only answer she got was her being dragged to Cynthia's room even faster. It was early evening with the sunset enveloping the sky in a gentle orange hue crusted with violet. Children were called back home for dinner and Pokemon prepared for the upcoming night. A smiling Kushina and a sleepy-looking Naruto were standing just outside the entrance door of the Carolina residence. After an exciting and joyful day, the mother-son duo were now preparing for their flight home. Cynthia, who looked just as tired as Naruto, and her grandmother were outside to see them off. "Bye-bye, Ruto. It was tons of fun like always. Let's play tomorrow too. This time I come over to your house. We have 4 days to make up for after all," she said while letting out a cute yawn at the end. "I can't wait. How about playing with all the Pokemon again?" Naruto asked excitedly. Looking at Cynthia, you could tell she was just as excited. Bouncing on the heels of her feet and gaining a big smile at the prospect of playing with all the Pokemon at the daycare. Not to mention Cheryl's and Kushina's Pokemon. "That sounds like an awesome plan. Can we play with Auntie Cheryl's and your Pokemon too?" she asked an amused-looking Kushina with big watery eyes. "I would have agreed no matter what, but those eyes are way too effective. Who can resist such overwhelming cuteness? It's even worse when the two of them do it together," a certain redhead ranted to herself within mind. "Of course you can play with our Pokemon. I bet they would love to play with you all just as much." Kushina cooed to the half-asleep Cynthia while glomping her. When she let go, she noticed that Cynthia already fell asleep. All the excitement and ice cream after 4 days of waiting would tire any child out. Even the ones with more endurance than most, namely Naruto and Cynthia. Picking her up, she walked over to Professor Carolina and handed her over gently. "Thank you for the hospitality. I would also like to thank you for the favor you did for me and Cheryl," she told her sincerely with a small bow of her head. The professor only shook her head with a small smile and replied, "It was no trouble. If there is anything else I can help you with, just ask away. I always love helping people, especially people I consider family." "I will. Thank you again," and with a final bow she made her way towards her nearly sleeping son and picked him up. After she settled him into a comfortable position, she took out a Pokeball out of her pocket, expanded it, and released her ever-faithful Salamence out of its confines. Before it could roar, though, it was silenced by his master's shushing. One look in her direction told him all he needed to know, and nodded his head and lowered himself so Kushina could get on without disturbing the now sleeping Naruto. Carefully climbing onto Salamence's back, she sat down, mouthed one last goodbye to Professor Carolina and waved with her free arm. Receiving a smile and a small wave in return, Kushina signaled Salamence to take off. This time he started out a lot calmer and less abrupt than before. That doesn't mean he was any slower as soon as he was in the sky. "We won't mega evolve for now, It could wake him up and we don't want that, right? She told him while stroking Naruto's hair tenderly. Understanding his master's concern, he continued flying towards their home while trying not to rouse the little boy from his slumber. Celestic Town. Pokemon Daycare. They arrived at home after another 3 minutes of uneventful flight. Kushina thanked her salamence and rubbed his head affectionately. Pleased with the nice gesture, he nuzzled his head into her hand. After she asked him whether he would like to sleep in his Pokeball or rather sleep outside today, he decided to lay down near a tree in one of the small forests. Wishing him a good night, she made her way towards her room. A little stirring in her arms made her look down and notice a slightly awake Naruto. You can continue sleeping, sweetie. Today you sleep with your mama and mommy, so don't worry and close your cute little eyes and take a nice long nap, she cooed to him and kissing his cheek. Following her advice, he closed his eyes again. Just before he was fast asleep, though, you could hear him mumble a quiet, "Awesome." Giggling lightly at her little ray of sunshine, she entered Cheryl's in her bedroom. Sitting in their bed, Cheryl was reading a new novel she picked up during her little business trip to Kalos. It was an intriguing story about indoctrination, mass surveillance and public manipulation. She knew Kushina would come into the room any second now. Hearing a heavy-set dragon in dead silence is not the most difficult task. True to her prediction, just half a minute later their bedroom door slowly opened and revealed a rather heartwarming scene to her. Her sleeping son, all snuggled up against the bosom of her wife, who carried him with great care and tenderness over to the bed. After tugging him in between their sleeping spots, she leaned over to Cheryl, giving her a deep kiss. The kiss lasted just over 5 seconds, but not more was needed to convey their mutual feelings to each other. Their desire to be together after being separated from the other for an extended period of time. Kushina could only chuckle to herself after noticing how similar their feelings were to Naruto's and Cynthia's, just a bit more adult-orientated. Seeing Kushina suddenly breaking out in tiny giggles, Cheryl could only smile bemusedly and wait for an explanation, which always came as soon as her wife would see her slightly confused expression. Changing her mind, she pecked her on the lips once to garner her attention. "Why don't you change into an appropriate attire and join the two of us in bed? After that I would love to hear about your visit and Naruto's play date," Cheryl suggested softly. "That sounds like a wonderful plan. Be right back." Kissing her cute wife once more, she vanished into their walk-in closet, leaving a serenely smiling Cheryl back in the room. "I still can't believe that I have such a wonderful wife and beautiful son sometimes," sighing blissfully, "all this thanks to a small yellow crystal making me slip," she thought, laughing softly. Right after finishing that thought, Kushina came back wearing a simple, emerald green pajama matching Cheryl's hair, while Cheryl was wearing a crimson red one in likeness to Kushina's hair. Setting the book she still had on her lap aside and putting it on the nightstand, she turned her attention back to Kushina, who by now had already dived under the covers and wrapped the blanket over her head, wearing it like a hood, with only her face showing. At this very moment Cheryl thanked every deity in existence for making excessive amounts of cuteness non-lethal. Otherwise she would be lying in a puddle of her own blood with more coming out of her nose. "I'm so glad I married this woman. I just want to cuddle her to death right now." Suppressing the urge to do just that took a lot of her willpower, but if an Uzumaki had anything en masse it would be willpower. Not to mention the risk of waking up little Naruto. Unforgivable. After composing herself again, she made herself comfortable and pulled the big blanket over herself and her little family. As soon as she lied down, Kushina started telling her about her day, including the cute reunion of the kids, in a hushed voice, still wearing her blanket hood. They were both smiling throughout Kushina's recollection of the interactions between Cynthia and Naruto. All the while softly nuzzling and cuddling their son. Sometimes they think about how their still innocent friendship would develop over time, but deep down both knew in what direction this relationship was heading. Both Cheryl and Kushina could clearly see that the two children's still immature feelings would change in the near future, giving way to something rare and beautiful. True love. It may sound cheesy, but there is no way to deny it. They complemented each other astoundingly well. You could already call it perfect synergy. Always helping one another, never leaving the other behind. With that final thought, the two wives shared one last kiss before embracing their slowly fading consciousness and letting themselves fall into the temporary abyss called sleep. The next morning started as usual for the family of three. Naturally first up they had to wake up, with Naruto being the first, who woke up Kushina and Cheryl too as a result. Not that they mind being woken up by an overexcited ball of sunshine and laughter who tried to tickle them awake. After their small tickle session, they relocated to the bathroom to freshen up, including brushing their teeth and taking a bath together. Followed by this came a classic English breakfast consisting of bacon, scrambled eggs, grilled tomatoes, a large variety of fried food, sausages, baked beans and a potato dish called hashed browns, which basically are rosti, but for some reason are not. Also, what is English supposed to be anyway? Kushina asked herself with a confused expression. Couple more seconds of thinking later her expression changed to a toothy grin and thought, who cares, as long as it tastes good and conjures a smile on the faces of my loved ones, it's good in my books. She decided to make breakfast by herself today and surprise her wife with a fabulous breakfast, just to show her how much she missed her presence. That also gave Naruto some time together with Cheryl after not seeing her for 3 days. Back in the dining room, Naruto was occupying Cheryl's lap with both of them facing forward. Leaning back into the bosom of his mama, he joyfully exclaimed, "I missed you, mama. Mommy always is a lot happier with you around." Before hastily adding, "Me too, of course." Resting her chin on his hair, she softly replied with closed eyes, "I also missed you too and am glad to be back." Naruto started shifting around a bit and Cheryl lifted her chin again and looked down to see hope-filled, emerald eyes similar to her own looking up at her. Canyon is coming over later today. We wanted to play with mommies and your Pokemon in the different fields. Mommy was okay with it. Can we play with your Pokemon too, please?" he asked her cutely. A smile and a kiss on his nose was her response. "Of course you can play together with my Pokemon. They love to play with you too after all. Just promise to be careful, okay?" she answered while holding out her pinky. Grasping her pinky with his own, he happily answered, "Pinky promise." "Thank you, mama. I love you." Swinging his tiny arms around her neck and giving her a big hug after disengaging his pinky. "I love you too, my little sunshine," she whispered gently, reciprocating the hug. This was the scene Kushina came into whilst wheeling in a little tray cart with their breakfast. Suddenly gaining a mischievous glint in her eyes, she held her heart in mock hurt, while overdramatically exclaiming, "Milady, doth thou not love me any more?" And falling to her hands and knees, "Am I not worthy of thy love, milady?" Her wife could only giggle at her melodramatic acting and couldn't help but be impressed by Kushina's commitment to a prank once she started with one. Her theatrical performance was stellar as always. Not understanding what was going on, Naruto hopped off Cheryl's lap and ran over to the still kneeling form of Kushina. "Mommy, are you all right? Do you have a tummy ache? Should I call a doctor?" he asked, panicking slightly. Before he could rapid-fire any more questions, Kushina suddenly tackled Naruto as gently as she could to the ground without hurting him. "'Twas thou who stole her loveth from me, was it not? For that thou shalt be punished," she proclaimed full of passion and started tickling him all over. 10 minutes of laughter, explanations and pouting by Naruto later, they were now fully enjoying Kushina's brilliant culinary skills in the form of their breakfast. Continuous small talk kept the light and friendly mood alive and only served to amplify the already joyous ambience. Noon couldn't come quick enough for Naruto. He was getting more and more fidgety the closer it was to 1 o'clock, the time Cynthia wanted to meet up with him at his house. When breakfast was over, they changed into their everyday clothes and Kushina and Cheryl prepped themselves for work. His mama was tending to the daycare customers at the reception desk and his mommy was taking care of the Pokemon belonging to said customers. In short, Naruto was incredibly bored and eager at the same time, so when the doorbell rang he shot off at extreme speeds and reached the door before the sound could even fade. He wrenched open the door and came face to face with a grinning Cynthia with some sort of container in her arms. She wearing a frilly, black sundress, sturdy shoes and a wide-brimmed sun hat. All in all, she looked absolutely adorable but still ready for outdoor activities. Upon seeing her he couldn't help but grin himself. "Hey Canyon, I hope you didn't have any trouble getting here," he asked while letting her in. "Everything was a-okay, Ruto. You should know by now that getting over to your house is not hard," she playfully pouted at him and put the container down. "Yay, I know, but I can't help but ask. Mama and mommy are running the daycare, but they said their Pokemon are in the field so we can play with them." he told her excitedly. Cynthia's visible eye started sparkling at this. Awesome. Finally we can play with Pokemon together again. They continued talking and simultaneously moved towards the fields to inform Kushina of their plans and to meet up with the aforementioned Pokemon. I bet today will be super fun. By the way, what is in that box you brought along? He asked as he pointed towards the non-transparent plastic container. Oh, this. In the last couple weeks I researched Poffins, you know the things that can make a Pokemon happier and healthier. I asked around a lot and experimented quite a bit myself to make these super duper Poffins. She proclaimed proudly, holding up the container with a grin and puffed out chest. Naruto looked really impressed. Wow. I heard about Poffins before and how it is really hard to make good ones. Though if anyone can do it, it's definitely you. There isn't anything you can't do in the kitchen, is there? He exclaimed. Images of a burning frying pan popped up in her mind. She banished those pictures back into the dark corner they came from before replying, of course. I'm just that good, while laughing nervously. He can never find out about my skills, or rather lack thereof, in making ice cream. She thought a little panicked. Anyway, let's find your mom and then go play. I'll show you the Poffins then, she said quickly before taking his hand and dragging him along. Kushina was brushing her Nanette's fur at the moment, and the fox-like Pokemon very much enjoyed the attention she was getting from her master, purring in content. Hearing footsteps, which from the sound of them belonged to two children, Nanette looked up and saw two of her favorite little humans running towards them. Noticing her Nanette's attention focusing on something behind her, she turned around and was targeted by two flying hugs. Catching them just in time, she returned the hug while spinning around and laughing cheerfully. Mommy, Auntie, Naruto and Cynthia shouted happily. Nanette could only watch on, fascinated by the pureness of the relationship the family of her master shared. She couldn't have imagined that something like this existed. Her master and her mate were truly special individuals. Hey little munchkins, it's good to see you two getting along as well as ever, Kushina said, looking down and genuinely happy at their excited and cheerful expressions. Spotting the little basket Cynthia was carrying, she couldn't help but ask, "Oh Cynthia, what beautiful things did you conjure in your little wonder kitchen this time?" "I made Poffins for yours and Auntie Cheryl's Pokemon. The Pokemon back at the center seemed to like them, so I hope yours do too." She beamed at Kushina with a dazzling smile. "If your cooking skills are anything to go by, they will definitely love them." Conveniently forgetting Cynthia's ice cream making attempts, "So you want to play with Cheryl and my super awesome Pokemon?" Her unanimous answer was a loud, "Yeah." From both. "Then let's call them here and ask them if they want to play, shall we?" Receiving the same answer as last time, she put her right index finger and thumb into her mouth and blew. The ensuing whistling sound echoing over all the fields, alerting specific Pokemon. In the daycare, Cheryl also heard the whistle and excused herself for 5 minutes with an apology. The customer, a friendly elderly man, only waved her off and said, "It surely must be your wife. Take all the time you need. It is not like I will run away with these old bones of mine," with a hearty laugh. "Thank you for your understanding, Jeremy," she replied with a small bow, before adding playfully, "You also are not that old yet. After all, you still have the energy to battle young unsuspecting trainers." He could only laugh more at her statement. "Touché. Now go, I bet Kushina is waiting for you." Bowing one last time, she vanished into the hallway behind the counter. Back outside, we find an ensemble of 6 Pokemon, all impressive in their own right, with an amused Kushina and starstruck children, looking very excited. Kushina's Pokemon wondered why they were called, though as soon as they laid their eyes upon the 2 young ones, their mood instantly brightened and knew exactly why they were called. A fun day was ahead of them. Naruto and Cynthia could only stare in amazement. No matter how many times they may have seen them, the team of one of the strongest trainers in the world will always fascinate them. Heck, even one of her Pokemon could fascinate them, but having the full team stand before you is always breathtaking. There was her ever-faithful Salamence, standing proudly in the middle, indicating his leadership position, with a friendly grin on his face. To his right stood the imposing form of her Tyranitar, easily towering over the rest. His spikes and fangs were noticeably more defined than what you would normally find on a Tyranitar. He could only smile at the tiny children who were bouncing on their heels in excitement. On Salamence's left side stood the ever-bubbly Meganium, looking happy as always. Her flower petals distinctly bigger and richer in color compared to her wilder not as well-trained kinsman out in the world. Floating next to Meganium was Kashina's Vespican. The silent queen emitted a soothing sound with her 6 wings, displaying her delight at meeting the children once again. Nenettles was curling around the kids and cuddling them with her tails. They thoroughly enjoying cuddling with her soft tails if their big smiles were any indication. Her fur shining brilliantly and her movements looking astoundingly elegant. She looked like true royalty. Standing to the far left were 2 Azumarill. One was yellow and the other blue. The yellow one was Cheryl's and the blue Azumarill was Kashina's. Like their masters, they were a couple. Cheryl's being male and hers female. Before anything else could happen they heard another whistle and saw Cheryl with her Blissey walking over to them. Her Blissey is nearly always on her side, helping her to heal Pokemon and humans alike. She also helps out Cheryl and Kashina at the daycare in general. Not a moment later and an incredibly fluffy-looking dragon swooped down and landed right beside her. It was her Altaria, her personality being as soft as her wings and just as gentle in nature. "Hello love, I see you already called all of them here," she asked smiling at her wife, whose response was a thumbs up with a toothy grin. "Yep, now that you are all here, would you guys like to play with the little ones today?" Kashina asked the assembled Pokemon enthusiastically. The Pokemon all shouting their agreement in unison. Minutes later and they were already mingling together, Pokemon entertaining the children and said children giving them Cynthia's homemade golden mild poffins. Cynthia is truly talented in the kitchen. Only 7 and already made her own golden poffins. Even Nenettles seems to enjoy them and she loves to be picky with her food. Kashina exclaimed impressed. Naruto and Cynthia were currently climbing up Tyranitar to put a flower crown on top of his head. Her cooking is truly marvelous. Good thing she has little Naruto to make ice cream for her, Cheryl said giggling, getting a small chuckle in response from Kashina. Now Meganium was putting more handmade flower crowns on top of the other Pokemon with the help of her vines. All the while the 2 blondes were clapping and laughing. These 2 are destined for great things, I just know it, was their shared thought. Kashina slung an arm around Cheryl's waist and pulled her close into a one-armed hug. Of course Cheryl didn't protest and snuggled deeper into the embrace. They continued watching them play for a minute longer before returning to work and tending to their clientele. Pokemon Daycare, Lake Resort. It was now early evening and we find Naruto and Cynthia walking along a small lake with huge smiles after saying their goodbyes and thanks to the Pokemon for today. The Pokemon all saying goodbye in their own ways. Tyranitar patting the 2 on the head, Salamence nuzzling their heads with his own, Nenettles cuddling with them one last time, Vespican hugging them gently, the Azumarills playfully shooting water in their faces, and Meganium releasing a pleasant aroma from her petals while licking their faces. For them it was an absolute blast of a day. Playing with super cool Pokemon the whole day together with each other sure is the best. Seeing such strong Pokemon enjoying her homemade poffins filled Cynthia with joy. Sitting down at the lake they enjoyed the quaint environment and relaxing atmosphere after a day filled with excitement and physical exercise. "So how did Mom and Mom meet actually?" Before Naruto could respond she added, "I know they are not my real parents, but when we marry they will be my parents anyway." "We will marry, right?" she exclaimed with a toothy grin before it changed and she looked at him with the cutest pout she could muster. "Of course we will marry. I promised you that ages ago. Seeing Mommy and Mama so happy together in their marriage really makes me want to marry you too, so we will be just as happy forever and ever," he answered her passionately. Cynthia could only form a huge smile and hug him tightly. "That sounds wonderful, happy forever together till the end," she shouted to the heavens. "Now tell me how they met," she asked him, gray eyes sparkling with curiosity. After sitting back down side by side he responded, "Sure. It isn't really a long story though. When Mommy started her journey she went through a Eterna forest pretty early on. She just entered it and suddenly heard a girl scream. Of course she rushed over to where the voice came from and saw Mama sitting on the ground. Mommy helped her get up and asked her what happened. It turned out she slipped out on a small yellow rock. Here he pulled out a necklace out of his pocket with a small yellow crystal attached to it and held it out in front of him over the clear lake, not noticing the slight glow the crystal was emitting. Deep within another dimension, A single crimson eye flew open in the darkness upon feeling a slight energy pulse from the other side, from another world. It was a familiar energy. It was its own energy. Flying out of the shadows was a large dragon. Its gray body had a distinctive serpentine look to it. 3 golden half rings loosely enveloping its neck. Black and red rings adorned the rest of its body with multiple spikes protruding out of its side. 6 gray and gold spikes in the middle and 4 pure golden spikes on its tail. In place of traditional wings were 6 flowing, black streamers with spiked, red tips on its back, sprouting out of the half rings. Its face guarded by a golden mask. Nearing the energy signature, it peered through the responsible portal and saw 2 children sitting by each other's side. One of them, the boy, holding the origin of the energy in his hand. The Gracious Orb. After helping her through the Eterna forest, Mama decided she wanted to follow Mommy on her journey. They never really told me why Mama decided that she wanted to join on the journey though, he finished a little confused. Wow, such a simple meeting led to so much awesomeness. We have to have just as many cool adventures. Her voice trailed off as she just pointed at his now intensely glowing necklace and asked in a flat tone, "Is it supposed to do that?" Looking in the direction she was pointing at, he gained a surprised look. No, it never did this before. They were about to start talking again when suddenly the reflection in the lake started distorting. Curiously they watched on as it changed more and more. Finally, after several seconds, the image cleared, showing the 2 children, a truly fascinating sight. Naruto and Cynthia were just completely starstruck. They read about it in books and legends, but never would they have thought to ever see it themselves. Giratina. Naruto and Cynthia could only stare dumbfounded. There right in front of them was one of the strongest and most notorious Pokemon known to mankind. The renegade Pokemon and ruler of the distortion world, Giratina itself. It took them a couple seconds to reboot their overloaded minds and shake their heads to regain cognitive thinking. Not much longer and stars appeared not only in their eyes, but all over their tiny frames. Giratina could only look on confused at the suddenly sparkling children. One could make out a tiny sweat drop when looking closer. Before it could be distracted even more by shiny humans, it reaffirmed the existence of the Gracious Orb and started moving towards the world-separating barrier. Back at the lake, the children clearly saw Giratina moving closer, which could mean only one thing. We will meet our first legendary Pokemon today. As if knowing that the others' thoughts were in alignment with their own, they looked eyes, or eye in Cynthia's case, and nodded, determination burning brightly. We will definitely not let this chance slip through our fingers. With that final thought, the lake rippled once, creating a perfectly smooth surface. Little beads of sweat rolled down their faces. The moment Giratina would have touched the surface, its body started glowing violet and began changing. Simultaneously, the lake lit up in the same colors. Winding currents started appearing, slowly building up to a vast maelstrom. All the while Naruto and Cynthia had to physically restrain themselves from bouncing around. Holding and squeezing the other's hands was their preferred way. They always did. It was comfortable, so why change it? Their excitement skyrocketed after noticing something starting to emerge from the newly formed vortex and recognizing it as Giratina's still glowing head. The more it moved out of the vortex, the more its body changed. Flowing streamers fused to 2 ghostly wings, but retaining the red spikes, the once serpentine body now taking on a more sauropod-like appearance, while the 6 spikes morphed into thick, clawed legs. Its face was visible now and the golden mask changed into a more helmet-like shape. When it completely left the portal, the glow receded and revealed Giratina in all its glory, hovering above the lake. Before the tension could rise any higher, it was broken by a stream of questions from the 2 children, who just couldn't contain their eagerness and thirst for knowledge any longer. Are you the real Giratina? Is it true that Arceus banished you? Are there any other Pokemon in the distortion world? Why did you change forms? Are you a boy or a girl? Can you understand and speak the human language? Why are you even here? Shooting one question after another and finishing jointly, they were now standing on their tiptoes, trying to get closer to Giratina's face. Of course their tiny bodies were nowhere near enough to reach the floating Giratina, but at that moment they didn't really care. Giratina may at first have been outraged finding the orb in the hands of some children, however it just couldn't stay mad after taking a closer look. These tiny humans are quite odd, though I feel no ill intent or any kind of darkness in them. How pure. Deciding to ponder later about these peculiar humans, it spoke up for the first time since time immemorial, solely because it never had to interact with humans before. Screeching and growling at other Pokemon doesn't really count. You intrigue me, little ones. It sounded like multiple voices speaking at once, though the feminine tone definitely being the more dominant one, providing a strangely soothing atmosphere. I haven't encountered such pure creatures since the creation, so let me answer your questions. In exchange you will answer mine. Not daring to speak, they nodded their heads up and down so fast, only a blur was visible. Good, but be not afraid to raise your voice. Legends may portray me as violent and vicious, however I would recommend always to make one's own opinion before judging. Also, to answer one question right away, we legendary Pokemon have no specific gender, I let you decide for yourselves. Wow, you're a lot nicer than I imagined. Right, Ruto. Nodding vigorously he replied, definitely. You're totally awesome. Even though they haven't known Giratina for long, the fact that the supposedly super evil Pokemon didn't attack them outright and take whatever she is here for was a big plus in their books. Yes, she. In their minds Giratina sounded way too feminine to be considered genderless or, God forbid, male. They beamed up at Giratina with huge, toothy, close-eyed smiles. Your compliments flatter me. On to your questions, children. Indeed I am the real Giratina. As you can see for yourselves, I can understand and communicate in human tongue. Before the two could ask their obvious question, she added, tongue can also mean language. Their open mouths closed again and sheepishly rubbed the back of their heads. There may be different Pokemon able to copy my appearance, albeit only I can travel between my home, the distortion world, and this dimension freely. I apologize for not answering your question regarding my banishment, but it is something I would like not to talk about. That's fine. Everyone has their own secrets after all, Cynthia exclaimed cheerfully, like how I won't tell Ruto what his next birthday present will be. Naruto only puffed up his cheeks at her remark and pouted cutely, eliciting a giggle from Cynthia. She gave him a quick smooch on the cheek, bringing back his radiant smile. Understanding and trust are highly important yet extremely dangerous. Choose wisely on who to trust and who deserves your compassion. My mother's also told us something similar too. Not all as it looks like. Don't just trust anyone, always be cautious, or something like that. Grandma also likes to remind us of that. All the while they stood with their arms crossed in front of their chest, nodding their heads with closed eyes. It was a rather cute sight. 2 mothers and 1 grandmother. Those 3 raised them immaculately, Giratina thought, impressed. Not all families without a fraternal figure can raise such splendid children. That is very good. I commend them for their splendid work they did raising you too. By now Giratina landed near the children who were comfortably seated on the grassy ground. To answer your next question. No, there are no other Pokemon inhabiting the distortion world but me. It was created by myself and only someone who either has my approval or finds a portal, big enough for them to fit through, can enter. Up until now there was no such incident, though there are disturbances from time to time I will properly explain later. Wow, you created your own dimension. We read about you living there but that one is new. So awesome, Naruto said enthusiastically, rocking back and forth in excitement. Cynthia was just as fascinated and could only concur, nodding wildly. Once again, I appreciate your compliment, however I am not the only one with such power. Anyway, this brings us to your next question. In the distortion world gravity works differently, constantly shifting and not as restricting. Solid ground is scarce and flying is the quickest way maneuvering around. Compared to my own dimension, here gravity is stronger, earth and water are widespread, so my body has to adapt. Constantly flying and floating in this unfamiliar dimension can be hazardous for me, I tire a lot faster. Legs help me more than streamlined spikes, and wings are a necessity for flight as long as you are not a psychic. All in all I trade a portion of my speed and power for defense and safety. I do this subconsciously, you could call it survival instinct. Quote. That is incredible. The ability to adapt to a whole new dimension being built into your body sure must be convenient, Cynthia chirped up amazed. But can you change back to your other form here too? A curious-looking Naruto asked. His best friend perked up at this and eagerly waited for the answer to that question. Quite so, but I require a specific artifact to be able to transform back. An artifact I lost 10 years ago, Giratina finished with a pointed look shot in the direction of Naruto's necklace. It took them a second before noticing where she was looking and gasped in surprise. So that is why it was glowing. It was reacting to you? Cynthia asked curiously. Naruto was just holding it in front of him, completely enraptured by the glowing crystal. Yes, it sent out an energy pulse I detected while you were holding it above the lake's surface. As you may know, I can peer into your world using various reflective surfaces and observe events happening here. Yup, the stories about you told us as much. We just didn't know if all stories are true or not. Now we know. One step closer to our goal, right, Ruto? Yay, someday we'll have our own books, full of our stories and facts about legendary Pokemon. After giving each other a high five, they settled down again, apologized to Giratina and waited for her to continue. An interesting goal you two have in mind. Back to the artifact. It is called the Gricious Orb. Even though it is called an orb, its shape is distinctly crystalline. It once was a part of me, coming into existence at the same time as I was banished. Due to its nature, it only benefits me, restoring the lost portion of my power, increasing my strength and bestow on me the ability to turn back to my origin form. There was one question burning in Naruto's head right now and he couldn't help but ask it. How did it appear in Eterna Forest 10 years ago? My mommy and mama had it for so long. I bet they were in front of a mirror or something like that at one point or another. Cynthia pondered on that question for a bit, before telling her own theory. Maybe it wasn't visible when they stood in front of them, or they didn't even wear it as a necklace but carried it around in a small box. Now that you mention it, they never told me how they used to carry it around. Heck, they just gave it to me this morning and it came in a little box too. He exclaimed, quite surprised himself. Normally the crystal is safe with me in the distortion world. I was careless and overconfident, so I put the crystal into one of the many caves. However, a decade ago a particularly strong space-time quake opened a rift and the tremors lead to the Gricious Orb falling into aforementioned rift. It must have reappeared in Eterna Forest. For me to pick up its energy signature, the crystal must be exposed directly to a reflective surface. The energy being sent out by the artifact itself is not able to penetrate physical barriers. That may have been the reason why I haven't found it until now. From what I understand, it holds great sentimental value to you, silently inquiring their names. They caught on quickly and introduced themselves with vigor. My name is Naruto, Naruto Uzumaki. And I'm Cynthia Carolina. Nice to meet you. It is a pleasure to meet you too. I must request of you two though to please return it to me. It is very important to me. After hearing her request, they locked eyes and held a silent discussion. Several seconds later they nodded to each other and Naruto spoke up first. We will give it back to you. Giratina visibly relaxed hearing him saying that, but only under one condition. Suddenly becoming tense again, her mind went into overdrive. Did I misjudge them? Are they just talented in masking their true intentions? Before the image of the children could deteriorate any further, Cynthia's joyful voice interrupted her morbid thoughts. Be our friend. That statement completely caught her off guard. All dire thoughts instantly vanished as she heard the sincerity in her voice. It must get pretty lonely and boring with no one to play with, and no one likes being lonely and bored. So Cynthia and me decided we want to be your friends. We would have so much fun together. Giratina was truly touched by their demand. Such kind-hearted humans are few or far between. Your condition seems reasonable. I gladly accept it. Living in seclusion for so long without proper company can be quite bland. Her approval elicited a cheerful yay from the children, who discarded all their reservations and ran up to one leg respectively, giving her a big hug. Well, trying to give her a big hug. This surprised Giratina. They truly do not fear me in the slightest. I don't know whether this is a good thing or a testament of my lacking intimidation factor, she pondered quietly. A glow in her peripheral shook her out of her thoughts. Looking down, she saw a widely grinning Naruto holding out her Gricious Orb without any hint of hesitation. Cynthia, with the same grin plastered on her face, stood directly beside him, hands clasped together behind her back and leaning forward. Her sun hat was long forgotten, lying around somewhere near the lake. Suddenly the crystal turned translucent and floated off of the string it was braided to, moving towards Giratina. I thank you too for returning this to me. This time I won't let it out of my sight for even a single second. The second the Gricious orb vanished into her body, it started glowing beautifully violet. As the light faded, it revealed her origin form once again, now floating slightly above ground and head bowed in deep appreciation. Well, it was yours to begin with and you answered tons of our questions, even if you didn't have to. Naruto's joyous mood quickly changed to trepidation as he realized something crucial. How will I explain this to my mothers? I can't just blurt out that I met a legendary and I gave the reason they are together away. Observing the panicking Naruto, Cynthia could only sweat drop. A couple seconds of pacing back and forth by Naruto later, she decided to put a stop to it and grabbed him by the shoulders and shook him around. Calm down, Ruto. We will find a way out of this. If we work together, we will work out something eventually, she said, trying to cool his head down. The other onlooker could only look on, amused by their predicament they found themselves in. I do hope this will not be a bad idea. Well, I won't know without trying, I guess. I may have a solution to your little dilemma. Perking up at the prospect of potentially escaping punishment, they paid rapt attention to Giratina. When she noticed that she had their full attention, she took a deep breath and exhaled. A small, reflective marble floated out of her mouth. It stopped mid-air between Giratina and the children. Suddenly a tiny piece of Giratina's top golden half rings broke away, leaving a tiny indentation, and started gravitating towards the still floating marble. Once reaching its intended destination, the golden fragment enveloped the marble completely, hiding it from view. It morphed between different shapes for a few seconds before stopping, revealing a crystal looking exactly like the Gricious orb. When everything was finished, it started floating down and came to a halt directly in front of Naruto and Cynthia, who could only stare fascinated during the whole process. They sure did that a lot today. With this, there shouldn't be any problems for you. It looks identical to the original, though is not imbued with my power. Before you take it, I would like to ask you a couple questions. Seeing no problem with that, they nodded and Cynthia exclaimed happily, ask away. You answered so many of our questions, it is only fair we do the same. It was no problem. After all, you returned a missing part of me, Giratina replied sincerely before continuing. My first question is, will you two start your own journey to uncover the secrets this world bears, to reach new heights, meeting new people and Pokemon alike, and make new friends? Of course. They didn't even have to think about what to say before brightly shouting their answer together. If one could see Giratina's face right now, one would see a small warm smile on her face. What conviction! That only reassures me that my decision will be the right one, she thought, impressed and relieved. A splendid answer. Before I ask my next question, I would like to tell you two about an ancient rule we legendary Pokemon upheld since the beginning of you humans. Use. An astonished pair of children asked while pointing at themselves. Yes, to be more precise, it started when the first Pokemon allied themselves with humans and fought alongside them. A look of realization and shock appeared on Cynthia's face. No way, is she going to ask us what I think she is going to ask? She thought to herself, her mind a whirlwind of possible outcomes and emotions. Naruto seemed to think about her statement too, but didn't come to any conclusive thoughts yet. Wanting answers, she waited patiently for Giratina to explain what exactly she means. The basically says that if one is a Pokemon of legendary origin, it is only possible to choose one human, who is found worthy, to become the lifelong partner of said legendary, partner in battle and life. By that point it already dawned onto Naruto what Giratina was implying and gained a similar look as Cynthia. I hereby offer you two the same opportunity. I wish to assist you two on your journey. Remember that only one can be chosen. It won't impede our friendship though. Even if I am solely partnered to one of you in battle, it won't stop me from being the friend of the other. The word, friend, still felt foreign to Giratina after countless times spent alone. It feels oddly satisfying to call somebody my friend, she pondered amusedly. The one who wishes to accept my offer shall take the newly created mirror ball and finalize the contract, she finished before floating back a bit. This is a crucial point that will determine her actions afterwards. Meanwhile, Naruto and Cynthia were dumbstruck at her offer. It wasn't even 2 days since they read about Giratina in history and story books, and now the very legendary herself offered her partnership to one of them. Cynthia suddenly stood up and pointed at a surprised Naruto and proclaimed loudly, "You should do it. The orb was yours to begin with, so it is only right that you partner up with her." Before he could protest, she stood with hands on her hips and added full of confidence and conviction, "Someday I will find my own legendary partner. Someone just as cool as Giratina. How can I travel besides you and call myself your wife one day if I can't protect you properly?" Blushing slightly, Naruto could only smile widely at her enthusiasm. How can anyone not like her? She is perfect, he thought to himself amazed. "If you are really super sure about it, I will accept," he stood up and declared with just as much conviction, "but I will help you as much as I can. What kind of husband would I be if I couldn't support my wife-to-be?" Now it was Cynthia's turn to blush, but her radiant smile never vanished. On the contrary, it grew even brighter. "I expected nothing less from you," she said happily. Finalizing their own little pact with a firm handshake while locking eyes and a quick hug, they turned towards Giratina full of determination. "I see you came to a conclusion. Now, step forward and take the mirror ball to complete the requirements," she said, overwhelmed with joy by their prior dialogue. "It seems like I made the right decision calling him," Giratina thought with a relieved smile. Not able to see her face, Naruto and Cynthia were none the wiser about her thoughts. Naruto took a determined step forward and shot one last look at Cynthia. She told him everything he needed to know just by nodding once and giving him a thumbs up coupled with a toothy grin. Her message was as clear as Groudon's sunny day. Go for it. Turning back, he slowly reached out for it, his hand hovered over the artifact for a few seconds. Taking one last deep breath, he closed his fist around it. Suddenly the mirror ball started shining brightly through the cracks of his hand. Naruto wasn't fazed much by it and held on strong. There was no change to the crystal except for the glow. Glowing lines made their way along Naruto's hand, converging on the back of it, forming dark blue spiral. It lightened up shortly and then vanished again. During the whole procedure not only Naruto but Cynthia too, who moved to stand right beside him, could only stare spellbound by the little light show. They were shaken out of their stupor by Giratina's gentle voice. "With that we are now bound for life. The insignia that appeared on your hand bears my energy signature, but not my energy itself, symbolizing you as my envoy and partner. It allows me to find you wherever you are and whenever you need me. If you wish to summon me, just focus those thoughts onto the insignia. They will be sent to me instantaneously and I will respond to you in the same way, so do not be surprised when you suddenly hear my voice in your head," she explained with a small laugh at the end. After that explanation they could only stare in wonder at what this little symbol could do. Cynthia though looked like she pondered about something before asking, "But why is the new crystal called Mirror Ball? I don't see any mirrors," she emphasized that statement by inspecting said object close up, which was now lying on top of Naruto's skyward-facing palm. "Good question. For that I would like Naruto to focus his thoughts onto the mirror ball and wish for it to expand, similar to any type of Pokeball." Seeing no reason why he shouldn't do it, Naruto did exactly as she asked him to. "Okay, now first focus onto the mirror ball." A picture of aforementioned item appeared in his mind. "Next think of expanding Pokeballs, just like mommies and mamas." With that final thought the previously small crystal suddenly turned into an orange-sized ball. Not expecting this outcome, Cynthia and Naruto jumped a little in shock, but that soon, once again, turned to fascination accompanied by quiet exclamations of wonder. Upon closer inspection it looked exactly like the small marble that came out of Giratina's mouth when she created this, just bigger. The most remarkable aspect of this mirror ball was that, like its name implies, the whole surface of the ball was completely reflective. It still bears the cosmetic indicators of a normal Pokeball though. Those being the separation line, dividing it in two halves which look exactly the same, and the obligatory button a normal Pokeball has to toggle the expansion. The reflection image was as clear as the reflected object itself, meaning there were no differences at all. Somehow it could even prevent the images from warping and function like any other flat mirror. "Oh, so that is what this is for," they both exclaimed in realization. "It seems like you figured out the purpose of this mirror ball already." "Impressive," she said, her voice carrying a delighted tone. "Ah, it was nothing," they replied sheepishly, rubbing the back of their heads at the same time. Usually people would react in some way if another person mimics oneself nearly perfectly, but it happened so often already for the two that it just turned into another everyday thing for them. They found it quite funny the first couple of times it happened, but after a while they saw it as proof that showed how much they had it common. Well, when one thinks about it for a bit and consider its connection to you, everyone could have figured it out, Naruto answered bashful, still rubbing his head. Cynthia added cheerfully, totally. I mean, it's a mirror ball. Knowing that you use reflective objects and surfaces to travel the dimensions made everything crystal clear. You could call it a pseudo-Pokeball, specially made for you. What outstanding children. They are not only humble but also incredibly perceptive. I can't wait to see what kind of change their journey will bring to this world. Single quote. Excitement bubbled up in Giratina for the first time since the last big battle between the legendaries, which was centuries if not millennia ago. Brilliant thinking, you two. It indeed is a means for me to appear before you should you be in need of my assistance or wish for my company. After all, there won't be any mirrors or the like in a forest, not to mention caves. As you may know, legendary Pokemon cannot be captured. We would simply destroy it. It is impossible to contain a force of nature with tiny, man-made objects, and that is another advantage of the mirror ball. It is nigh indestructible. Only me or Arceus itself are able to break it. It was one surprise after another for the children today. They already knew that legendaries can't be captured by conventional means, but to think that this small ball was so incredible fascinated them to no end. That is incredible. Let's make sure we never lose it, Naruto. We should make a special box or necklace for it. An excited Cynthia suggested to Naruto, who could only shake his head in agreement. Good idea. Let's ask Grandma, Mommy or Mama when we get back. After agreeing to their little plan to keep the crystal safe, Naruto shrunk the ball down again. He figured if he can expand it with a thought, why shouldn't the opposite work? Not only the children were in for a fair share of surprises on this day, it seems. Giratina was astounded by how fast Naruto got used to the mirror ball, even to the point of figuring out how to turn it back again. Without any help to boot. There still was a small question floating in Giratina's mind, though I must ask, were you not scared of me when I first appeared in front of you? Looking up at her, they only shook their heads. Not really. I mean, sure, you look pretty intimidating, but if we fear any legendary Pokemon we encounter, how can we be friends with them all? Cynthia exclaimed as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. Naruto only gave a thumbs up after Cynthia's explanation. What a splendid reason. She could only sweat drop. Their reason was odd but commendable nonetheless. It was the right attitude to have for their upcoming journey. At least it was not entirely my fault. A small sigh of relief escaped her. Noticing that it was getting late, Naruto and Cynthia decided to head back home for now. We thank you for everything, Giratina. But we must go now or my mothers will be really mad at us for staying out for so long, not to mention missing dinner. Naruto sincerely thanked her with a deep bow. His best friend mimicked him and bowed just as deep. Yet before they could run off, they were interrupted by Giratina's voice once again. Understandable, but please stay just a little longer. I have one last surprise for you two, especially for little Cynthia, her eyes glinting with mischief. Even more surprises, was the shared thought of the two blondes. You already did so much for us. We're not even sure if we really deserve all this awesome stuff you already gave us, Cynthia said in a small voice, drawing circles in the dirt with her foot. Even though Naruto wanted to somehow cheer her up, he actually felt quite similar. Yay, we just gave back something that belonged to you anyway. Everyone would have done that. Deciding to dispel the gloomy mood, Giratina mock scolded, nonsense. Don't sell yourself short like this, you two are wonderful human beings. Not everyone would have just returned something of such value to me without demanding outrageous rewards or ransoms. So put back on those radiant smiles and await this surprise with the same excitement you showed before. She proclaimed joyfully. All negative thoughts evaporated instantly after hearing her heartfelt speech. Thank you, Giratina. Glad the two children were back to their cheerful and bubbly selves, she awaited a certain someone's arrival. A devious idea popped up in her mind and she couldn't help but giggle to herself internally, not unlike a certain red-headed mother just before a glorious prank. Back in the daycare, Kushina was currently tending to the eggs Cheryl brought with her from Kalos, putting them in individual incubators. Shoo! A cute sneeze escaped her. Pulling out a handkerchief, she cleaned her nose swiftly before putting it back into her pocket. Are you all right, dear? Cheryl's concerned voice came from behind her. Yep, everything is a-okay. I bet someone just awakened their inner prankster. Kushina exclaimed with a boisterous laugh, head held high and hands on hips. Clonk. Kushina was crouching low, nursing the new, still steaming lump on her head, crocodile tears flowing out of her eyes. The ever-reliable ladle still in hand, Cheryl furrowed her brows and started scolding Kushina like she was a misbehaving child. In some ways that statement held a surprising amount of truth. Less playing around and more working, Mrs. Otherwise you not only cook dinner by yourself, but sleep alone today too. Cheryl emphasized her threat by crossing her arms and turning away with an upset expression, occasionally throwing an inconspicuous glance back and gauging her reaction. Of course she would never go through with that threat. She wanted Kushina in bed with her just as much as Kushina her after all. Kushina could only gasp in shock. Not spending the night with her wife. Blasphemy. Throwing herself at Cheryl and holding her firmly around the waist, her head level with Cheryl's stomach, she looked up with big watery eyes and quivering lips, the dreaded puppy dog eyes. I will be a good girl. Please don't leave me. I will work really, really hard. Stay with me, she wailed in desperation with comical tears running down her eyes. After seeing the miserable form of her wife, she just couldn't keep a straight face any longer and broke out laughing. She kissed the lump on Kushina's head as if wanting to make it better and then pecked her quickly on the nose. She moved her lips beside Kushina's ear and whispered a quiet, "Gotcha," and twirled herself out of the grip and skipped back to work, leaving a dumbfounded Kushina behind. I just got pranked by my wife. She stood up and slowly got back to work. Her face all of a sudden broke into a huge smile. God, I love this woman. Thanks.